let's dive into Creation Science 101. And the first one, this one's going to be creation basics. And again, we want you to get all the information to come to an informed conclusion. We're going to look at two histories. We're going to define terms. We're going to look at laws of physics. And we're also going to look at logical fallacies and why it matters. Okay, that's the game plan for today. Okay, and basically, this is not science versus religion. No. This is science based on one view of history that acknowledges God versus science based on another view of history that doesn't acknowledge God. So basically, one has a creator and one has blind chance and random collisions of atoms. That's the foundation. That's the belief system of the past. It's our perspective of the past. And we need to get our perspective of the past right, or our perception of the present will be wrong, and our focus on the future will be wrong. And so let's take a look at these two perspectives of the past. Okay, the evolutionary timeline. Basically, 13 billion years ago, there was a Big Bang. Okay, that's the origin of space, time, and matter. You know, where did the material come from? Not sure. Okay, and then billions of years, over billions of years, the stars evolved, the chemicals evolved. 4 billion years ago, Earth comes into being. And then 3 billion years ago, the very first life comes into being, the very first living cell. And from that single living cell comes all the plants and animals and people that have ever lived from that single living cell. Okay, that's the evolution timeline. Blind chance, random collisions of atoms. Okay, how does that compare to the biblical timeline? Well, can you see that? You know, thousands of years compared to billions of years? You know, it's just a speck of chalk up there. So let's zoom in on it. And roughly 6,000 years ago, God created everything in 6 days. And then roughly 4,400 years ago, there was a flood. And that's where we get the fossils and the layers of rock. And then 2,000 years ago, Jesus came. Anybody know what BC stands for? Before Christ. You know what they're saying now? BCE, before Common Era. And I've seen it in the books, and just this year I actually saw it in real life. It's up at the Kensington Park and by the Runestone. They had a timeline, and they used CE and BCE. So they're using people's tax dollars to get rid of Jesus Christ. Okay, and then today Jesus is going to be coming back. That's what the biblical time frame is. So when did people get on the scene? You know, if evolution is true, it's way at the end of this creation. And if the Bible is true, it's right at the beginning. God made, right on day 6 was Adam and Eve. And people ask me, well, which one do I believe? And it's like, well, I'm going to agree with Jesus. Because in Mark 10:6, Jesus says, but from the beginning of the creation. So Jesus is a creationist. Not only is he a creationist, he's a young earth creationist. He says, but from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. Not millions of years after creation, not millions of years of evolution, at the very beginning. So if we're a Christian, we should use Jesus as our example. And he's saying, hey, the people there, it didn't evolve, it was right at the beginning. And that's actually one of the problems we have in Christianity. There's a lot of Christian colleges and seminaries that are teaching some form of evolution, which is basically saying God didn't do what he said, or he didn't mean what he said. And Baylor, BYU, Notre Dame, they're all doing it. And I don't know why. I don't know if it's for accreditation or what. But let's take a look at two frameworks. What's the biblical framework for these subjects? Okay, the Bible says, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And he made the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. That's the sun and the moon. And then it says he made the stars also. So God created all those. You see that? All those dots there? Those are stars in our galaxy. When you look through the Hubble Deep Field image or the James Webb Space Telescope image, you get just as many dots, but they're galaxies. There's an incredible amount of stars out there. Okay, so it was all created all at once. That's the framework. Biology. Chapter 1, it says everything produces after their kind, after his kind. Says that about 10 times. And that's a biological statement. Dogs produce dogs, cats produce cats, horses produce horses, and there's variations within a kind, but there's limits to that. And it also said the seed is in itself. You know, what came first, the acorn or the oak tree? You know, it's like the chicken and the egg thing. And I didn't know how to answer that till I was 32, and then I heard somebody say, you know what, God said he made the birds, not the eggs. So it's the chicken that came first. And then just last year I heard, I think it was Dr. Galuza, he said, you know, God made the chicken with the eggs inside of it. And then the eggs came out later. And that's, And there you go. Okay, and how about dinosaurs? What's the biblical perspective of dinosaurs? Well, they're land animals. They were made on day 6. And then during the flood, 2 of every kind of those dinosaurs got on the ark. So they were young. And then they got off the ark, and people called them dragons and killed them. And that's why there's legends of dragons all over the world. It bothered Carl Sagan so much that how could these people describe the same animal when they're separated by time and distance? And he wrote, Dragons of Eden. And he submitted that our memories are passed on in our DNA. And that's been debunked. Okay, geology. The Bible says there's a worldwide flood. And that's where we get our layers of sedimentary rock. That's where we get our fossils. And that's why we have legends all over the world also of a big flood. And then anthropology. Okay, the study of man. Where did man come from? And that's Genesis chapter 11, the Tower of Babel, where God confounded their languages and scattered them around the earth. So then you got these isolated people groups, and then they get different dominant features. And I hate to say race, because and when I get a form and says, what race are you? I'll check other, and I'll put human. There's one race. We're all sons and daughters of Adam and Noah, all right? And they always try and divide us into skin colors. I like what was it? Benjamin Watson, he was a football player for the Patriots and the Saints. And he said, and this was during the Ferguson riots, he said, this isn't a skin problem, it's a sin problem. You've got people that abuse their authority, and they got people that don't respect authority. And it says, the answer to this is Jesus Christ, and I agree with that. Okay, so that's the biblical framework. Okay, now if there's, in the other framework, the evolutionary framework with blind chance and random collisions of atoms, astronomy. Okay, there was a big bang where that's the origin of space, time, and matter. Where did the matter come from? That violates laws of physics, and we'll get into that. And their predictions are always wrong. When the Hubble Deep Field image was coming out, they thought they were going to be looking so far back into the past that they were going to see these infant galaxies forming. And Bob Enyart, the Bible teacher on the radio, says they're not going to see infant galaxies. You're going to see average everyday galaxies. And they were shocked when they found average everyday galaxies back then. But those who don't learn from history are destined to repeat it. And the same thing happened with the James Webb Space Telescope. This time it was Jason Lyle. He says their predictions are wrong. We aren't going to find young galaxies. And when they're wrong, they're going to say that galaxies formed earlier than expected. And he was right on both counts. The Big Bang is a laughingstock. And Danny Faulkner says it's not a matter of if it falls apart, it's a matter of when it falls apart. Okay, that's astronomy. And then biology. Okay, their view of biology is 3 billion years ago, there was a single living cell that turned into all the plants and animals and people that we've ever seen. This evolutionary tree. Okay, we don't find that in the fossil record. What we find is an evolutionary is a creation orchard. All these kinds are separate. There's no transitional anything. And then dinosaurs. Where'd they come from? There's no transitionals for them, but they died out 65 million years ago. That's noteworthy. They died out millions of years ago, and we'll see if the evidence follows that. And then geology. The earth forms, and granite's never been molten. It's made of mica, hornblende, quartz, and something else. And they all have different densities. So if granite was ever molten, it would separate out into those different densities. So when they say that the earth was a hot molten blob, it's not. Granite won't allow that. And then they've got these plate tectonics that are moving around. But there's this book up here, 20 Reasons to Question Plate Tectonics. It doesn't work. And T. Christian Smoot, I think his name was, he mapped the floor of the ocean. He says plate tectonics can't work. Okay, and how does subduction begin? How do you get one to go under the other one? I mean, there's a lot of problems, and yet it's being taught as dogma. And so he's talking to that Smoot guy, he's talking to the graduate students and the college students because they are more open-minded to look at something different. And then anthropology. Yeah, anthropology. You got master races. Remember Hitler? The master race, he was going to get rid of the subhumans. And it all starts with Darwin. Darwin, I can't believe people celebrate Darwin Day. They obviously haven't read what he said, because in Descent of Man, or even Origin of Species, what's the whole title for that? By means of natural selection, or preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. He was a racist. And then if you read Descent of Man, this is what he writes. At some future period, not very distant as measured by centuries, the civilized races of man will almost certainly exterminate and replace the savage races. And I've seen a chart where it's got the Caucasian people, the white people, they evolved more than the black people, and then there was the apes. And that's what that was in the Scopes monkey trial textbook. And so anyhow, he's a sexist and he's a racist, and anybody who celebrates Darwin Day doesn't know science. You know, Darwinian stuff has fallen apart. It does not work. They should celebrate Newton Day. Isaac Newton, now there's somebody to celebrate. Okay, so we looked at the two histories. Let's define the terms. Okay, we need to make sure when we're in this discussion that we're talking about the meaning of the same word. And let's define science. I was at St. Cloud State. I was promoting this talk, and I'm at the kiosk, and that poster's hanging above me. And a student walks by and crinkles up his forehead and says, "What do you mean?" And I asked, "Well, what do you mean? What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, how can you have evolution versus science when evolution is science?" And we need to define the terms here. And so I asked him, "Well, what do you mean by science?" And he said, "Well, like experiments, like in a lab." And I said, "Oh, the type of science that's observable, testable, repeatable, falsifiable, the scientific method type of science?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, evolution's none of that." He said, "Well, sure it is." And I said, "Okay, name an experiment that proves evolution." And he said, "Well, there's lots of things." And I said, "Well, just give me your best thing. What's your best evidence for evolution?" And his eyes go to the ceiling for about 5 or 10 seconds, and he said, "Geology." And I asked him, "Well, what about geology?" And he says, "The layers of rock." And I said, "The geologic column?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "You got to be kidding. You believe that layers of sedimentary rock laid down by water all over the world proves that we came from a rock?" And he said, I said, that could just as easily point to a flood, a worldwide flood in the days of Noah. But why did I say it proves that we came from a rock? Because this is their general ed textbook, St. Cloud State. This is a page from it. They're trying to explain how life began. And it said, to the best of our knowledge, it should say to the best of our atheistic knowledge. And you go down there and it says that it rained on the rock for millions of years. So they believe that we came from rock. And I don't know about you, but I don't have enough faith to believe that one. But how did this happen? Well, the next paragraph explains it. Somehow, despite the harsh environment, living organisms appeared. That's not science. That's not science. And so I'm talking to the student at the kiosk, and he said, "Well, what makes the most sense?" And I said, "Exactly. That you were created by God, or that hydrogen and helium turn into people." Because that's what the Big Bang says. Supposedly the Big Bang made hydrogen, helium, and a little bit of lithium. And I don't know, I don't have enough faith to believe hydrogen and helium turn into people. But I'm talking to that student, and at the very end he says, "You know what, I'm going to think about this." And that's a hallelujah breakdown moment when an evolutionist is going to think. Because you got to see both sides of an issue if you're going to think. And up until this point, all he's seen is what's in class, and that's only half the story. Okay, and so if he's intellectually honest, he's going to become a creationist like Gary Parker and Dean Kenyon and Spike Pizarris, and the list goes on. And even John Sanford, the inventor of the gene gun. The science led him to the creator. It's like there's no way this got together by chance. And then evolution. That's a real slippery word, and this is one of those logical fallacies called equivocation. It's bait and switch. They'll give you a meaning, and then they'll change the meaning halfway through the argument, or halfway through the textbook. They'll say, "Here, boys and girls, you got big dogs and little dogs. See, that's evolution. And because that's true, man came from molecules." And it's like, wait a minute, time out. Objection, objection. You just changed the meaning. The top one is variation within a kind, and creationists go along with that. Yeah, you get big dogs and little dogs. There's variation with the kind, but there's limits to the kind. And then that second part is, no, that's molecules to man. That's whenever I'm talking about evolution, I try to clarify it. Molecules to man evolution, fish to fisherman, amoeba to elephant, bacteria to blue whale evolution, the whole spectrum. That's what I'm talking about. And creation science evangelism, they had this brochure out there. We'll give you $250,000 if you can give us any empirical evidence for evolution. But nobody ever saw that brochure, or not many, so they put it on a billboard between the St. Louis Zoo and the St. Louis Science Center. Wanted real scientific proof for evolution, $250,000. And they got calls. And the guy said, "Hey, I got resistant soybeans." And he said, "Well, what did you start with?" And he said, "Soybeans." And he said, "What do you got?" And he said, "Soybeans." He said, "That's not evolution. That's just variation within a kind. If you start with soybeans and end up with a rhinoceros, okay, now let's talk. I'll pay to see that." But that doesn't happen. We've taken a look at the two histories. We've defined some terms. Now let's take a look at some laws of physics. And again, this goes back to our view of history. One view acknowledges a creator. The other view doesn't. So all there is blind chance and random collisions of atoms. Okay, now which one of these breaks laws of physics? I would say that I would submit that the one that breaks laws of physics should be discarded. Because when you break laws of physics, that's a miracle. And you shouldn't do science based on miracles. Okay, so these are questions you can ask in class. What caused the universe? The universe is pretty big. And that brings us to the law of causality, the law of cause and effect. Everything that had a beginning had a cause. And the universe had a beginning. It's not eternal, or those stars would be all burned up. So the universe had a beginning. So it had a cause. And whatever caused, and the law goes like this. And everything had a beginning, and everything had a cause. And the effects, or some of the effects of that cause, can never be greater than the cause. So my question is, what caused the universe? Whatever caused it has to be bigger than the universe. And that's where you get a supernatural creator that made a natural creation. If you allow for that, you don't break any laws of physics. But if you reject that, then you break laws of physics all the time. A supernatural creator, and they'll say, well, what caused God? Well, like I said, whatever had a beginning had a cause. God didn't have a beginning. He's just been eternal. Okay, so if we change the definition of science to allow for a supernatural creator, everything fits. But if we say that you can only use natural explanations to explain a natural universe, well, now let's start breaking laws of physics. Okay, where'd the matter come from? And this was during that Bill Nye, Ken Ham debate. That was a question for Bill Nye. Where'd the particles for the Big Bang come from? And he said, don't know, it's a mystery. That's why we do science. And then Ken Ham said, well, Bill, there is a book that tells us where matter came from. And then the very next question to Bill Nye was, how did consciousness come from matter? Don't know, it's a mystery. That's why we do science. And then Ken Ham, Bill, there is a book that tells us how consciousness came from matter. But let's just take a look at this evolutionary formula, the Big Bang. Nothing plus nothing equals what? Yeah. And you could say people, that's what we're going to do step by step, or nothing plus nothing equals everything. But they'll say nothing plus time, whatever. Well, actually, no, there was no time back then. This is the beginning of time, too. Time, space, and matter. They call it a singularity. Nothing plus nothing equals a Big Bang, an explosion, Big Bang, which violates the first law of thermodynamics. You cannot make matter from nothing. All right, and then this matter gets more organized as time goes by. It turns into planets and stars and people, which violates the second law of thermodynamics. Things fall apart over time. Okay, and then how do stars form? Okay, in the textbooks it says it's the nebula theory. The dust cloud collapses to form a star, which violates Boyle's law, because as the volume decreases, the pressure increases. And when Gary Parker was in grad school, they're explaining this theory to him, and he asked him, well, how does that work? When air pressure is 60 to 100,000 times stronger than gravity, how is it going to collapse? And the professor said, well, maybe we should call it the nebulous theory instead of nebula. Nebulous meaning hard to understand. Okay, and then how do planets form? The theory goes like this. You got the gas that turns to dust, turns to pebbles, turns to rocks, turns to boulders, turns to these really big ones called planetesimals, turns into planets. Okay, that's the theory, but it falls apart at about the boulder stage, because when they slam into each other, they fall apart. They break apart. They don't stick together. I mean, you ever played pool? Do those balls stick together? No, they break apart. And we can see this in real life. Those rings of Saturn are not turning into moons. They're falling apart. That asteroid belt is not turning into planets. So that's just a belief system. Okay, and then how did life begin? And I ask this question all the time when I'm at campus. If I meet an atheist, I said, okay, let's play in your ballpark. If there's no God, how did life begin? There's life all over the planet. How did it start? Okay, and here's the formula, and I had to adjust it lately. It used to be rocks plus time plus water equals life. But then I found out that actually water is a hindrance to life. Water breaks apart the molecules faster than they can get put together. So it's a real conundrum. You need water for life, but you can't start water in life. That's a real, and that Bob Enyart had that question asked that question to a really big over in Germany, and they had to admit, that he says that nobody's talking about it, but they had to admit it that, yeah, water is a problem for starting life. But then you get the simple living cell, and that violates the law of biogenesis. Life only comes from life. Okay, and then, but how do you get people to believe all this stuff in the textbooks? Well, they use these magic words, or fuzzy words. Some people call them fuzzy words. And we saw one of them before. Somehow, despite the harsh environment, living organisms appeared. Somehow, I met a biologist who taught at a college, and he said he always had his students have a journal and write down fuzzy words. So then they would know when they're being taught science, and when they'd know when they're being taught belief systems about the past. And science is observation and testing. Somehow is not observation and testing. And then you go through that chapter in this book, and those fuzzy words could just come falling off like water off of Niagara Falls. You got, as best as we can surmise, the story of origins apparently arose. Some scientists speculate, probably originated, probably diverged. And this one, our best guess. Okay, that's not science. But they really want an answer, a natural answer for the origin of life. So they had $1 million on the table. You want to make $1 million? Just give us some scientific proof for the natural process of the origin of life. $1 million was on the table for 13 years and nobody could do it, so they took it off the table. It's a dead end in science. But they really, really, really want this answer, so now they've upped it to $10 million. You want to make $10 million? All you have to do is solve the largest mystery in history, how genetic code got inside cells, and how cells intentionally self-organize, communicate, and then purposely adapt. Go ahead, knock yourself out. You know, if I was a betting man, I'd bet my house you're not going to be able to do it. But I'm not a betting man, so I'm just going to make a prediction here. In 2024, you're not going to be able to, nobody's going to get that money by 2034, 54, 64. I would say in 100 years, there's nobody's going to be able to do it. Because that is so incredibly complex. We're actually farther from explaining the origin of life than in the Miller-Urey experiment in the 50s, because we know so much more. It's so complicated. Okay, and then 1 cell plus time equals people. Here we go. You know, you see, boys and girls, you started as an amoeba, and then one of your grandpas was a frog, and then now he turns into a prince. Okay, see, now if you kiss a frog and it turns into a prince quickly, they call it a fairy tale. But if the frog turns into a prince slowly, now we're talking modern science. That is a belief system about the past. All right, and now, this is fuzzy words too, millions of years. When I teach VBS and the kids, I'll say, here's your baloney detector. This should go off when you're being taught something that's not true. And there's a clue for it. It's millions of years and billions of years. If you ever hear that, your baloney detector should go off, and we test that. And actually, I was pretty excited. You know, millions of years, billions of years. I watch thehighwire.com every week. You know, I feel you need to get all the information to make informed decisions, and we're not getting it from our government and media. And so, but when Del Bigtree talks about people who have been here for millions of years, it always kind of sits wrong with me. And so I went up to the Global Health Freedom Summit up in Alexandria 2 years ago, and I actually got to meet Del. And this year he wasn't there, but Mickey Willis was, one of his really good friends who directed Plandemic 1, 2, and 3, highly recommended. And I was able to talk to him. I waited till the autograph line was all gone, and so I could talk to him. And I went up to Mickey and I said, you know, I thanked him for what he did. And I said, you know, when we hear safe and effective, we know that person has believed the government lie of medicine. So why did I say that? Because there's no medical product that's safe for everybody. Even peanut butter's not safe for everybody. And then I said, and there's even a bigger lie out there. When you hear millions or billions of years, that tells me that person's believed the government lie in education. And then I talked to him about blood cells and dinosaur bones and the hydroplate theory. And I said, and when Del says millions of years, I always cringe, because it tells me that he's believed the government lie in education. And then just last week, he was talking about something, and he said, and people have been here. Did he say millions of years? No. He said, and people have been here God knows how long. Which is the perfect statement, because God does know how long we've been here. You know, and so I was so excited about that, and then I watched the High Wire today, and they're talking about the climate change, and somebody was talking about millions of years again. So, I don't know, maybe it's just slowly, but I encourage people to throw your pebbles in the pond. You know, share stuff on the internet. Try and help people see that there's another way of thinking. And hopefully we can get enough pebbles thrown out there, they can't ignore the waves. And especially if you can influence an influencer. And Dell's got 6 million people watching his show. And he said, God knows how long instead of millions. So I was pretty happy about that. Okay, and then these layers of rock are supposed to be laid down over millions of years, slowly over millions of years. Well, the question you can ask is, wait, how did rock layers bend? You know, let's take a look. And this is going to be a clip from Mike Snavely. And well, listen to this.
Anywhere you go, you see these strata lines of rock all around the world, especially like where a road might cut through a mountain or maybe along a mountain. This one is in Utah, and this one is in Pennsylvania. Look at this one in Vermont. These layers are bent 90 degrees. Now wait a minute, you cannot bend rock, it'll simply break. And look at this one. Here's another really interesting feature, also in Pennsylvania. Look at all those severely bent layers. Look at a portion of the Rocky Mountains of Western Canada. Notice that these mountains are not only bent, but they're severely kinked. Look at these interesting layers of rock in Glacier National Park. Each of these layers is roughly as tall as a human, and look what they're doing. These layers are not just bent or kinked. These layers literally bend back over on top of themselves, like an S pattern. How could that have happened over vast amounts of time? The simple and obvious answer is that they can't.
They can't. But what the hydroplate theory explains that stuff perfectly, and he's actually got a clip from Walt Brown explaining the hydroplate theory in that video, and it's what's it called? The Horror of the Flood. And when I saw the title, I was like, I don't want to know what the horror of the flood is. But then they showed that video at the Hydroplate online conference, and it's like, man, that's the best one I've ever seen. And so, yeah, they should have called it Evidence for the Flood, or Answers to the Flood, because he's really good at doing that. And that's why we're having Mike Snavely Day down in the cities. He's going to be an hour away at the University of Northwestern, maybe an hour and 15 minutes. I encourage everybody to get down there. It's going to be well worth the talk. I don't know if he's ever coming back to Minnesota, but that would be a really good. He grew up in Africa, and he gives safaris here in America and over in Africa. He's just got a wealth of knowledge. Q&A is going to be so interesting. And it could be online, but sometimes we have technical difficulties. And if you want to be on the email list for St. Cloud or Twin Cities Creation Science Association, their website is tccsa.tc, and you can ask to get on their email list. And they meet the third Tuesday of every month. Okay, so anyhow, another question. Hey, why are blood cells and nerves still in dinosaur bones? See, bones, blood cells and nerves, they fall apart. They can't last millions of years, which is a pretty strong indicator those dinosaurs aren't millions of years old. And you see that microscopy today? Those are Mark Armitage photos. And who's he? He discovered bone cells in a triceratops horn when he was working at the University of California. I think it was Northfield, and he was running their huge spectron analysis lab microscope, and he found these bone cells, and he got it published in Acta Histochemica. And nobody had ever done what he did. And what happened to him? They fired him. Yeah, they fired him. They didn't like what he found, and there's books over here. There's 3 volumes of people that have been censored or fired or lose grant money or lose their position because they find something that goes against evolution or they question it. And we'll get back to that later. But here's an article from the National or Smithsonian Magazine talking about the blood cells. It says the findings amazed colleagues who had, oh, and by the way, those nerves, he's finding nerves in those cells too, in blind dinosaurs. Those are dinosaur nerves. And I helped him at a workshop one time, and it's just amazing. When you zoom in on those nerves, it just comes more and more beautiful. It's just incredible what God's made. See, when you zoom in on something man-made, it becomes more and more imperfected. But that was just beautiful. And it goes on. The findings amazed colleagues who had never imagined that even a trace of still soft dinosaur tissue could survive. After all, as any textbook will tell you, when an animal dies, soft tissues such as blood vessels, muscle, and skin decay and disappear over time, while hard tissues like bone may gradually acquire minerals from the environment and become fossils. And here's a fossil at the ICR in Texas. And they got this fossil. It's a fossil jellyfish. It doesn't have any hard material, and it's a fossil. Yeah, it's something very, very unique happened for that. And they got it specifically because Darwin said it couldn't happen. But let's go along. Oh, and by the way, a fossil, how does a fossil form? Is that dead deer on the side of the road going to turn into a fossil? No, it's going to get scavenged and decomposed. The only way a fossil forms is if it gets buried rapidly. And therefore, any layers that have fossils in it were laid down rapidly. That's the whole geologic column. It's not millions of years. It was laid down rapidly. Okay, and then that article goes on to say if particles of that one dinosaur were able to hang around for 65 million years, maybe the textbooks were wrong about the fossilization. Well, yeah, they're wrong about that, but they're also wrong about the 65 million years. Maybe they're wrong about that. They never questioned the age of the dinosaur. And how do they determine the age? Well, it's found in that layer. And everyone knows that layer is 65 million years old. Well, how do you know that layer is 65 million years old? Well, it's got dinosaurs. And everyone knows that dinosaurs went out 65 million years. And yeah, they don't want to carbon date those bones. You can that's another talk. But this is from ICR. The fossils still say no, the Cambrian explosion. And it says the presence of actual undecayed tissue in fossils found at virtually every level of the geologic column completely undermines evolution's deep time paradigm. So those layers are supposed to be laid down over millions of years, and they're still finding undecayed tissue there. And it can't last millions of years. Those layers were laid down rapidly. Okay, and now this is my very first talk at St. Cloud State. I was so nervous. The Atheist Club was there, my pastor was there, and you could actually still see it on my YouTube channel, Solidify Your Faith, going to Who's Your Daddy 2014. And I thought it went well, because the first question, during Q&A, they asked me about the Bible. Oh, that's a good sign. My science must have been solid. But anyway, Who's Your Daddy? A Theory in Crises. Come see what's being censored in your science class. Free admission. And at the bottom, guaranteed not to make a monkey out of you. All right? And then a few years later, we thought, hey, let's do that talk again. And so I wanted to promote it at the community college. And their free speech zone is like Siberia. Nobody goes there. And so I went in and I bought lunch at their cafeteria. And then I sat by the door, and those tables there are higher than everyone else. And then I taped this poster to my table. And so there I am eating my lunch, and that's taped to my table just like that. And it made some interesting conversation. There was a woman that came, and she said, what did she say? Or she's trying to make points for evolution, and I'm making points for creation. And I said, if you went out to the parking lot and you popped the hood on your car, would you believe that engine evolved? And she said, yes, science has evolved to make that engine. And I said, no, not science evolved, that engine evolved. Do you believe that engine got put together by chance random processes without any intelligence? And she said, no, there was intelligence. And I said, clearly. A dead giveaway for intelligent design is multiple parts working together with precision timing. Agreed? And she agreed. And I said, well, guess what? Multiple parts working together with precision timing for a purpose. I said, we were intelligently designed too. And she laughed, and a student came up to me and said, do you know who that was? And I said, no idea. And she said, that was the biggest, baddest atheist on campus, and you kicked her butt. I was texting your comments to my friends, and it's not that I'm smarter than her. It's just that I have an accurate perception of the past. I believe that there was a creator. She believes there wasn't. And so she has to believe that engine couldn't evolve, but that our body had to evolve. And so it's a constant state of hypocrisy. And I'm just saying, allow God in the science class, and everything fits. Okay, but now if you have this solid science behind you, they're going to try and silence you with other ways. They'll try to marginalize your message. And let's take a look at some of the logical fallacies. And you're going to hear this. Science says evolution is true. Anybody see what's wrong with that? Science says everything is true. What's that?
It's not provable.
Well, okay, it's not provable. There's something else there. Can anybody hear science? Listen real closely. Can you hear science saying anything?
Dr. Bochy says.
Oh, yeah. You're a step ahead of me there, Blaine. You're a step ahead of me. No, science doesn't say anything. Science doesn't do anything. Scientists, however, they look at the data and they interpret it based on what they believe. That's key. They interpret it based on what they believe, and then they go off and write the articles in Smithsonian and Discover and the encyclopedias and the textbooks. And if they don't believe in God, they're going to have a godless explanation. Okay, and that was the big hurdle for me. When I first saw the creation perspective when I was almost 40, I thought, you mean the textbooks are wrong? You mean the science books are wrong? And I'm here to say, well, if they're written from a godless perspective, yeah. Because when you start with nothing plus nothing equals everything, there's no limit to the amount of mistakes you're going to make. And so I believe that people should have all that information. And then that is called reification. And that's when you give has something that's an abstract idea and you give it personal attributes, like Mother Nature is angry, or Father Time always wins, or Mother Nature and Father Time is how we got here. No, it's just nature, it's just time, there's no personal attributes to it. And then the last few years we had trust the science, follow the science. It should have been trust the scientists, follow the scientists. And if a scientist is telling me something, I'm saying, hey, who funds you? Where are you getting your money from? Could that influence your interpretation of the facts? And there's limits to science too. You know, scientists can put a man on the moon, but scientists can't prove how the moon got there. There's 4 theories out there and none of them work. And notice that big pan at that big dish at the bottom of that leg, that space capsule leg. That's there because they thought there was going to be billions of years of space dust there, because the moon's supposed to be there billions of years, and it wasn't. You know, that's why they put there the ladder's 1.5 feet too short, you know, because they thought it was going to sink into this dust of billions of years, and it's just a fraction of an inch there. It's not billions of years. And now the evolutionists are saying, no, we were never concerned about that. Yes, you were. Go into Real Science Radio, rsr.org, and search rocket scientist, and you're going to be able to hear Henry Richter explain the experiments, the tests they had to do to make sure that thing won't just sink into a bunch of dust. Another fallacy is, hey, everyone believes in evolution. You know, if you don't believe in evolution, man, you're just one of those flat earthers or something. You're on the fringe of society. Well, and speaking of flat earth, you know, there's creation journals, creation science journals that are written by scientists. Okay, peer-reviewed journals. Are there any flat earth journals? Not that I know of. Okay, but everyone believes in evolution, and that's not how you determine truth. You could have everyone saying, everyone believe that all swans are white. You just need one person to find a black swan. It's not the majority. It doesn't matter about everybody, and that's the appeal to authority. And it's not true anyway. This is a Gallup poll from 2019, and that 40% on the right, that's the percentage of Americans that believe that God created man in his present form less than 10,000 years ago. So the majority of Americans are creationists. And the bottom line is atheistic evolution. Man came here with no God at all. And then the middle one tries to have a foot in both worlds. That's the middle one, 33% said, yeah, God used evolution to make man over millions of years. And so that's where we're at right now. The majority of people are getting their tax monies taken away to teach a minority's perspective, is what's happening. Look at that trend. When I was a kid, less than 1 in 10 believed in atheistic evolution. And now it's doubled. It's 1 in 5, and it's pretty close to 1 in 4. And that's what motivates me to get out there and start asking people questions. St. Cloud State, how did we get here? Was it creation, and evolution, or intelligent design? And this is St. Cloud State. I figured it would be a landslide for evolution, and it wasn't. It was 43 to 39. It was nip and tuck. And when people would stroke evolution, I would always ask them, how did life begin? Because they can't answer that. And then I'd show them this sometimes, and so it helps them realize they have faith too. They have faith in blind chance and random collisions of atoms. Okay, and it doesn't answer how life began. Did the same thing at the community college. How'd life get here? And actually, creation won in a landslide. It was 49-21 when that was done. Okay, yeah, and then I went to another community college, and it was creation actually won that one 16-6 when it was all said and done. And there was a student that stroked under creation, and I asked him, why'd you stroke there? Why'd you put it there? And he said, well, that's where everyone else was putting it. And I'd heard about this concept, but I'd never seen it, but I'd heard about it. It doesn't matter what issue it is. Okay, there's 15 to 20% on either side, and they're not budging. They're set in stone. But the middle, 60 to 70%, they're going to go wherever the current is strongest. So I'm doing what I can to make sure that that people have an opportunity to think about a creator so they can come to their own conclusion. Okay, and here I am at Penn State Altoona campus out in Pennsylvania. And evolution won that one, 17-13. This is University of Illinois, Chicago. I didn't have a big sign, but so I just walked around and talked to students. And evolution won that one, 18-10. But there was 12 people that didn't know. And it's good to talk about this. Okay, here's another one. Well, all scientists believe in evolution. You could say, yeah, because if they don't, they get fired. 3 volumes over there talking about that. But it's not true. Not all. And besides, that's not how you determine truth anyway. The consensus of scientists does not determine truth, and we're going to get into that. This is the appeal to authority, arguing that a claim must be true simply because someone or group says so. As Blaine said before, and the classic example of this is when Fauci said, "I am the science." So he appealed to the ultimate authority himself. And so we just have to watch out for these logical fallacies. And it's not true either. You can go into dissentfromdarwin.org, and you have to be a PhD scientist and above to sign this. And you got the most prestigious colleges around the world represented in every field of science. I mean, you got Harvard, you got Johns Hopkins, and you even got Dean Kenyon there. He was a guy that wrote college textbooks called Biochemical Predestination. And he became a creationist. He doubts Darwinianism. And there's 28 pages of this. So there's roughly 1,100 to 1,200 PhD scientists that do not agree. And what do they sign off on? We are skeptical of the claim for the ability of random mutation and natural selection to account for the complexity of life. Careful examination of the evidence of Darwinian theory should be encouraged. It's like, yeah, let's study this a little more before we start teaching it as dogma. If you go through that, it's almost every college. You got Stanford, Cornell, everything. And what concerns me, anybody know who that guy on the left is? Yeah. Neil deGrasse Tyson. He's got the biggest scientific megaphone out there. A lot of people listen to him. And what concerns me is he's banging the consensus drum. And that is not science. But just listen to him.
This is world-renowned astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson, a scientist, explaining why you and everybody out there shouldn't ask questions. Watch.
There's a list of top-ranking medical professionals. Just take a look.
I'm talking about, excuse me,
Dr. Peter McCullough. No, I want to go through what happened
consensus.
Here. This is the problem with the consensus.
The consensus.
Okay,
medical professional.
I want you to
because the medical is so huge. I can find you an astrophysicist who is sure we've been visited by aliens. That's not the
problem
consensus.
was the scientific method died here, and this is the point I want to make. It died a death here, and I need you to help me save it because Dr. Peter McCullough is the leading cardiologist.
I don't care if titles don't matter here.
But what should matter?
They don't matter.
What
matters
should matter?
Is the consensus. I'm not interested in medical pedigree. I'm interested in medical consensus, in scientific consensus.
Scientists that were on the ground, that were dealing with patients, were being censored, were being shut down. Their YouTube channels were being shut down. Their LinkedIn's were being shut down.
Because the individual scientist does not matter.
So let me get this straight. The scientist doesn't want you to follow the scientific method because it goes against the scientific consensus, even if the consensus was wrong. And it's not just the vaccines. The consensus did the same thing with COVID. Remember when Fauci and company said COVID came from a wet market? That lab leak theory went against the fake consensus. If you mentioned it, you got censored and smeared as a crazy person. Hey, kook, the coronavirus came from a bat. Definitely not the coronavirus lab around the corner.
Even if it was wrong. And let's just take a look at all the times the consensus was wrong. Let's take a walk down. Oh, and that was, by the way, was Del Bigtree on the high wire. That's what you're missing. It was wrong about the geocentric universe. They taught that for over 1,000 years, saying that everything revolves around the Earth. All the planets, all the galaxies, all the sun revolves around the Earth. And you needed people to stand up to the consensus, people like Copernicus and Galileo and Kepler and Newton, to finally throw that on the scrap heap of history where it belongs. They stood up to the consensus. And they also taught that big rocks fall faster than small rocks was a consensus until Galileo proved that wrong with the Leaning Tower of Pisa experiment. And then the consensus was bloodletting. Hey, if you're sick, you got bad blood, we better take some out of this arm so you can get better. And if you take it out of that arm, you got to take it out of this arm too, or you're going to be out of balance. And that's how George Washington died. They took too much blood out of him. But his last words were, "Doctors, I'm dying, but I'm not afraid to die." Can we say that? See, when a Christian dies, they just go from one life to the next life. it's going to be a glorious day. But if you're not a Christian, it's may not be. Okay, and also spontaneous generation. They taught this for over 1,000 years too. That life just pops into existence. See, I'll prove it to you. I'll put some meat on the table, and guess what? Maggots pop into existence. I'll put some grain in the corner with some rags, and mice will pop into existence. And it was not even 200 years ago that they believed that, until Pasteur came along and proved it wrong in 1859, the same year Darwin came out of his book. And Pasteur disagreed with Darwinian theory vehemently. Okay, and then uniformitarianism, that's present processes are the key to the past. That's how you explain all the past events. And Harlan Brent says, no, I don't think so. I think that those scablands out in Washington, that was a big glacial flood. It was a catastrophic event. He was mocked and ridiculed for decades because the consensus said uniformitarianism. And sometimes science progresses one funeral at a time. And I've seen that in my lifetime. Okay, and so it took him decades to get the credit that he deserved. And this one's the one that just boggles my mind. The scientific consensus was wrong about washing your hands. I mean, I don't even eat without washing my hands. But what were they doing? They were doing autopsies and then going delivering babies without washing their hands. And Ignaz Semmelweis says, hey, guys, I think we should be washing our hands here. And it went against consensus. They rejected him and they ridiculed him. Even when his hospital, he implemented that in his hospital, and yet his death rate was less than 1%, and their death rate was 10 to 15%, and they still mocked him and ridiculed him and rejected him, and he never did get the credit he deserves. And so what, in 200 years, what are they going to look back at us on and think, boy, how could they believe that? And just a personal opinion, I'm thinking it's going to be the Big Bang. Nothing explodes and turns into everything. That's a hard one to swallow. Then also evolution, the single living cell turning into everything else without any mechanism to add information to it besides random chance and mutations. I mean, that's like having the instructions to a skateboard and rearrange them all, just rip out pages and misspell words, and that's the process to build a space shuttle? It just does not make sense. Okay, and I was invited into a classroom. I was at a college talking to these two students for about 20 or 30 or 40 minutes. Great, I just love talking and hearing about what they think. And they were pretty sharp, actually, and they were open to new ideas, which was really encouraging. And he said, I don't know if I can do this, but why don't you come to this building at this time? And so I went, and it turned out to be his class. And the professor said, I heard you were coming, come on in. When the students get here, I'll give you 15 minutes to talk. And that's education. When you allow all the ideas on the table, when you censor people, that's indoctrination. But he allowed me to speak, and I was done in 10 minutes. And I said, any questions? And a student asked me, do you believe in God or science? Anybody see what's wrong with that question? It's the either-or fallacy. They call it bifurcation. There's a third option. Do you believe in God or science? And I said, I believe in both. See, the Bible and science go hand in glove. The Bible and evolution bang heads because evolution's not science. It's not observable and testable. And science I like is observation and testing. Evolution isn't. And then another student said, isn't it sad that that question's even asked? And I said, well, I understand why it's asked because you guys aren't being taught the history of science. You aren't being taught that the who's who of science, the mental giants, the people who brought us, bacteriology and calculus and chemistry and electromagnetics and electronics, and they were creationists. They were trying to learn about the creator. If you want to learn about a painter, study the painting. If you want to learn about an author, study the writings. But if you want to learn about the creator, you study the creation. And that's what they discovered, trying to learn about the creator. And these are mental giants. It's like Pasteur and Newton and Kepler and Boyle and Faraday and Kelvin. And I told the students, this guy Matthew Murray, he invented a whole field of science because of the Bible. Because in Psalm 8:8, God said there was paths in the sea. And this guy believed it and said, well, if God says there's paths in the sea, I'm going to go find them. And he studied the naval charts. And he found the ocean currents and started oceanography because of the Bible. And it saves the shipping industry billions of dollars because the Bible was allowed in science and people were allowed to think what God said. And I think we're really hurting ourselves by excluding it. I think we should let all the ideas on the table. And then the professor, he asked me, well, what would you do if you were the science dean? I said I'd allow all the theories on the table and I'd focus on the one that was making accurate predictions. That's what I would focus on. And if I ran the government, I'd say, you don't get a grant until you make an accurate prediction. Okay, let's not have any money holes here. And then I said we'd study science, not belief systems about the past. We'd study science, what's observable and testable. I mean, the heart doctor doesn't need to know where the heart came from. He needs to know his anatomy very well. But yet, you still have clowns like this that said evolution is the foundation for science. No, it's not. Evolution, I mean, if evolution was false, I mean, would airplanes fall out of the sky? Would the internet stop working? Would the surgeons not be able to operate? No, evolution's not the foundation for anything besides atheism. Dinosaurs are the gateway drug for evolution. Evolution's the gateway drug for atheism. That's typically how it goes. And did anybody see the Ken Ham, Bill Nye debate back in 2014? Okay, you can still see it. It's on the internet. And I was so blessed. This is before Grace Campus Fellowship. So Northland rented a kiosk for us to promote the debate. And that was a lot of fun. And then Northland rented a classroom so we could live stream the event. And the kids just flooded in. We filled up all the chairs in the classroom. We got all the chairs from the another classroom, filled all of them up. We started to get chairs from the lobby. This person couldn't even sit in the room. And what you're not seeing is there's two or three people in the front watching the monitor in the back. When people say there's not an interest in this, oh my goodness, there certainly is. And during Ken Ham's opening remark, he played this.
Hi, my name is Dr. Raymond Damadian. I am a young Earth creation scientist and believe that God created the world in 6 24-hour days, just as recorded in the book of Genesis. By God's grace and the devoted prayers of my godly mother-in-law, I invented the MRI scanner in 1969. The idea that scientists who believe the Earth is 6,000 years old cannot do real science is simply wrong.
Simply wrong. He invented the MRI. It's his MRI that's in the Smithsonian. It's called the Indomitable. He got the first patent on the MRI. But did he get the Nobel Peace Prize for the MRI? No. They could have gave it to 3 people, but they gave it to 2, and they didn't give it to him. Apparently one said, if you give it to him, I'm not going to accept it. And so they thought that would be such a scandal, is what the backstory is on that. I could be wrong, but that's what I heard. But no, he didn't get the credit he deserved for that. And yet Bill Nye, during that whole debate, he kept on saying, we need to teach evolution or we're going to fall behind the other countries as far as innovators and inventors. And that is the atheist altar call. We have to teach evolution or the world's going to fall apart. You have to teach, it's the Chicken Little thing. We have to teach evolution or the sky is going to fall. I saw this one debate. It wasn't this one, but it was, and we have to teach evolution. It's a matter of national security. Okay, it just blow it way out of proportion. And I just wish, just once, Ken Ham would have said, and I know there's lights and cameras and all that, it's a hard position to be in, but I wish just once, because Bill Nye kept repeating that altar call. We got to teach it. I can't stress it enough. The Commonwealth of Kentucky, we're going to fall behind. He kept saying that over and over again. And I wish Ken Ham would have said, say, Bill, how far did we fall behind? How far did America fall behind the other countries when a creationist invented the MRI? That would have been a mic drop moment. Boom. It just blew his whole argument apart. We didn't fall behind the other countries. We got catapulted ahead of the countries because a creationist invented the MRI. And speaking of inventions, yeah, how far did we fall behind the other countries when creationists invented the airplane or Morse code? And then there's a lot of inventions from a creationists. And again, okay, so again, now why does this matter? Let's close with this. Why does it matter? Why bother? You know, when I was in grad school, I was Social Science 104. No, I wasn't in grad school. I was a freshman. In Social Science 104, the professor's talking about Lucy, our supposed ape-like ancestor. And I raised my hand. Honestly, I did this and I asked, well, what difference does it make? We're here, we're now. Who cares? You know, I thought we were just wasting our time. And she said, well, it makes a difference to some people. And as I've matured, I've begun to realize that, hey, it makes a difference to all people. You know, and how do you interpret it? You know, if Lucy's true, well, then the Bible's false. If Lucy's our ape-like ancestor, throw this thing away. There's no Garden of Eden. There's no Adam and Eve. There's no sin that brought death into the world. There's certainly no payment for sin on the cross so we can go to heaven if Lucy is true. But Lucy is false. I mean, yeah, and I can prove it. Because there's a Nova documentary out there called In Search of Human Origins, where they showed how they had Lucy's hip. It looked like a chimp, and they cut it and they twisted it to turn it into a human hip. So instead of them adjusting the theory to fit the evidence, they changed the evidence to fit the theory. And I don't have time now, but I can show you during Q&A. It's more than a battle between in perspectives of the past. It's a spiritual battle. It's a battle between God's truth and Satan's lies. Who are we going to believe? Where are we going to put our faith in? In a creator or in blind chance and random collisions of atoms? And it makes a difference to everybody, because here's the foundational questions of life. Who am I? What am I worth? Why am I here? Where do I go when I die? And Karl Ba, he's given a talk over in Fiji, and he's saying, yeah, they think about these questions too. And if Lucy is true, who am I? Well, according to this, I'm a mutated animal. That came from pond scum, that came from exploding stars, that came from nowhere. I mean, talk about low self-esteem, right? You know, no wonder people have self-esteem problems if you teach them they're a mutated animal. You know, and if there's those mass shootings, when they have shootings, they're always trying to take away the guns, and I'll always comment, well, hey, did that shooter get taught that people are mutated animals and there's no God? You know, beliefs have consequences. Okay, and so who am I, and what am I worth? Well, I'm just a bunch of chemicals, and actually, I'm part of the problem. There's too many of us on Earth. And when you look at government documents like the Kissinger report or the Agenda 2030 commercials, there's some powerful people who want to depopulate the planet. And if you want to dive down that rabbit hole, I've got a Rumble channel called Education Not Indoctrination and another one called Revival of Truth. So if you want that information, and why am I here? Hey, you just get one chance in life. You might as well make the most of it. If it feels good, do it. Why not? And where do I go when I die? To the grave. It doesn't matter if you killed hundreds of millions of people like Stalin and Lenin and Mao Zedong last year with communism, or Hitler with fascism, or you lived like Jesus Christ. You all go to the same place. That's if Lucy is true. But if Lucy is false, how do you explain that? And the Bible's true. Well, who am I? Well, I'm made in the image and likeness of God, the creator of the universe. And what am I worth? I'm priceless. Do you know what Jesus did for me on the cross? You know what he gave up so I can go to heaven? He paid the penalty for me. It's priceless. And why am I here? Well, it's to glorify God. You know, as Solomon said, it's to fear God and keep his commandments. Jesus said to love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And he also said, go ye into all the world and preach the gospel. And so that other people, the gospel is Jesus died for our sins according to the scriptures, and he was buried and he rose again the third day according to the scriptures. We're supposed to let people know about that. And where do I go? Yeah, where do I go when I die? I'm going to heaven. It doesn't matter. It's not based on what I did, but it's based on what Jesus did for me. And question, where are you guys going? It's something to think about. And I just want you to consider. There's some information up there. You can check it out with the Bible. And don't put your faith in my words. But here's a real quick illustration of this. You know, God loves us. He really does. But we all have sin. He loves us, but he hates our sin. That sin has to be paid for. And the payment of sin, the wages of sin is death, according to Romans 6:23. The wages of sin is death. It's not penance or confession or doing good works or prayers. No, it's death. Someone's got to die for it. And God loved us so much, he sent his son Jesus to die on a cross, to pay the penalty for our sins on the cross. Then he was buried, and then he rose again the third day, proving he was God. And so that's one perspective I ask you to consider. Okay, and put your faith in Jesus Christ while you can, and then you don't have to fear death. You don't have to fear death. And so basically that's what our perspective, my intent here is to give people all the information, and then you come to your own conclusion. You know, do you want to put your faith in a creator or in blind chance and random collisions of atoms? It's up to you. But you should have all the information, so it's an informed decision. When one half of it is excluded, then it's not education anymore. Now it's indoctrination.